So, Farm Simulator. Yeah, this is a little bit strange compared to the two games I've reviewed so far, yeah. But believe it or not, I actually really enjoyed the time I've spent with this one, and if it hadn't been for the fact that it came up as one of the games that was free, if you picked it up with it in a week on Unreal a couple of years back, I might never have actually played it at all. I've also decided that since the previous two reviews have turned into a bit of a guide on the game anyway, that from now on, that would be deliberate. So this will also act as a bit of a guide to the, I'd say the basics, but it's like a reasonable amount of Farm Simulator. So, in this case, the game in particular I'm talking about is Farm Simulator 2019. Not to be confused with the 2022 edition that's releasing in about a month or so, or the early versions of the game. Just to be confusing, it actually released in 2018, go figure, and it's made by Giant Software while being published by Focus Home Interactive. This is, I think, about the only series I actually know that they make. It is, as it sounds like, based around owning your own little farm, or in some cases a very large farm. It's based around the machinery side of things, much more on the hand farming side of things. You won't be scything crops like in Stardew Valley. It's going to be combine harvests and tractors all the way. The main part of this game, and the meat of the game, is the career mode, although it does have a pretty decent multiplayer from everything I've seen of it. I've not personally tried it. Once you go into career, you'll be prompted to choose your game mode out of the three various options. These three options, of course, being New Farmer, where you already own some land and some kit, and you have a small amount of money with, I think, a small loan as well, if I'm remembering correctly. Farm Manager gives you quite a lot more money. You get, I believe, 1.5 million, but you start with nothing. No land, no buildings, no vehicles. And you do start with a $250,000 loan. Start from scratch, meanwhile, I believe, gives you something like 500,000. And I've never tried it. I've already found there's plenty enough hard work to be done in Farm Simulator and New Farmers, so start from scratch always seemed like it would be a little bit overkill for me. Then once you've selected your option, you get to pick your map. By default, the game comes with two, which I believe are the first two here, Ravenport and Felsbrunn. You get to pick a character, set up their looks, appearance. There's a handful of options, but it's not huge. But you could do a little bit of customization. And then you get to pick which mod you want. The official DLC also uses this exact same menu, in fact. Now, in my case, for this review, I will be showing it off with none of the DLC except a single debug mod that I'll be using to help me quickly show things off, shall we say. Right, and here we are on Ravenport. I should mention, seeing as I mentioned the maps a moment ago, that while the game has two maps in it by default, there are a lot more available, as you probably saw. The mod hub has a great deal of options in terms of just mods in general. And a lot of them are quite good quality, actually. I believe Giants actually somewhat moderate a lot of their content. And the quality definitely shows. Some of the mods are excellent. A lot of the vehicles look like they could easily be made by the devs themselves. There is also an option on the mod page, which is on the main menu. I'll maybe get to showing that off later. Enable an option to make it show all of the mods, as by default it will show you off the... I believe the mods that they've already rated highly, or the ones they've vetted more thoroughly, I believe that's right. So, what is farming actually like? Well, for the most part, it's very chilled out. It's certainly not a high-octane game. But the steps to it are pretty simple. First of all, you'll need to go to one of your fields. You can tell which are yours, as you see on the mini-map. Okay, I thought I would expand it a bit more. The numbers that are in green are farms you own. If you don't have a field already, you can go to the map by pressing the escape key, press the X key to toggle up the by land mode, and you could either sell land you own or buy new parcels of land. Land tends to be on the expensive side, and like this external area of the map, you can't always buy all of it. But once you own the land, you can do whatever you like with it. You can place your own buildings on it, you can farm it, plough it, leave it as a blasted waste if you want to do that for some reason. There's a lot of options. Next up, you'll need a tractor. Again, on New Farmer mode, you'll start with a handful. You usually get at least one tractor, although it varies between maps. And you'll want to make sure that your tractor has enough horsepower for the job it's doing. You can check the horsepower of a vehicle when you go to buy them, or by going into the garage menu. You access the garage menu, I should mention, or the easiest way to access it, I should mention, is by pressing the P key to open up the shop, which you can do remotely, or you can actually go up to the shop to do it, and then pressing the garage key. And then this little readout here will show how much horsepower you have compared to the tool you're, for example, using it. So I believe all of these are more than 100. Yeah. No, don't sell it. Yeah, so these are all more than 100, and I believe any of the tools I started with will be... No, as we say, they don't start you with any unusable tools. So, the first step with your land is to see whether you need to plough it or not. Now, if you don't have periodic ploughing enabled, you probably won't have to. I don't believe it is... Yes, it's not enabled by default, but I would normally recommend you turn that on. In fact, I'll show you the settings I would normally use. I'd recommend you go 15 times timescale, easy economy. It basically changes how much money you get for your crop, and I found the game a bit too slow on normal. I dread to think what it's like on hard. Also recommend setting fuel use. Fuel uses could be default or low, really. I don't find that makes too much difference, but I also recommend turning these off so that you have to go and... firstly, you have to go and buy these things yourself to refuel yourself. You've got to keep everything stocked. And secondly, the AI will actually... If you're using the AI to help you farm, we'll get to that later, they will charge you extra if you have these features enabled. So I recommend by default turning the refills off, plant withering and crop destruction off, and periodic ploughing, lime and weeds off. Still, as you probably noticed from me showing this off in the first place, the game is actually quite... what's the word? Providing? I think providing is the wrong word, but it's quite willing to let you sort of modify the experience. But anyway, yes, the first thing you need to do is check if your field needs ploughing. If you have periodic ploughing enabled, you'll need to plough it every 3 or so harvests, I believe. If you do not have it enabled, you will still occasionally have to plough your fields, maybe every... Oh, you don't have to plough them every so many fields, you have to plough them if you plant certain crops, and I'll get onto those later. Ploughs can obviously be found in the plough section of the store. The machines themselves are these sort of slightly funky shape looking ones. They tend to be very high horsepower requirements and low working width. Ploughing is not fast, and it needs horsepower if you want to do it in any reasonable amount of time or with any reasonably sized tool. You could also substitute in a subsoiler instead. They do exactly the same thing. If anything, I find subsoilers are normally better. I find them easier to use. I believe in real life there's certain reasons you would or wouldn't use subsoilers compared to ploughs, but in the game they're considered identical. One thing I'll mention while I drive off to go collect the plough I've just bought. The shop will be at a set location on the map. You can usually find it fairly easily. It's that one in the bottom left in this case. It looks like a shopping basket. Anything you buy will arrive there, and I believe when you sell things, the closer your vehicle is to the shop, you'll get slightly more for it. It can sometimes pay to drop off equipment when you're selling it. Additionally, while I'm driving up, I feel I should talk a little bit about the objective to this game, or rather the fact that there isn't one, really. I mean, at the end of the day, you don't actually technically have to do anything, but your money will usually tick down. Vehicles, buildings, and various other things do have a slight maintenance cost, and if you have a loan, which I believe you do normally start off with one, even if it's not huge, you will be paying interest on it each day. So at the end of the day, technically the only real goal for this game is to make money. Keep going. See your money in the top right, you can change it between different currencies, whatever you like. Now this doesn't of course mean you can't set your own goals, and I'll occasionally find myself doing something like that, like, oh, I'd like to get the equipment to farm this sort of crop, or have these animals, or I'd like to buy the whole map, maybe, for an example. But by default, the game doesn't technically give you an objective, and I know that can be off-putting to some people, but personally with this particular one, it's never really bothered me. Check the bit of kit, which I'm technically doing backwards because of those signs, but oh, no, that is right, okay. And we'll take it back to the farm. So, once you've arrived at the field, and you've got your tool ready, in this case a subsoiler, you're ready to start ploughing. Basically, get yourself into position, lower your tool into the ground, and you're ready to go. You drive across the field and it'll, well, plough it for you. Now, you don't have to do this manually. If you press the H key, sorry about that, with many implements, there's only a handful that you can't do this with, and AI will take over for you. Basically, you'll hire someone, you might notice that the, yeah, that doesn't look like my character anymore. Now, the AI does have a few limitations. It's not always the brightest, and as you can see, if there's obstacles in the way, they'll sometimes stop until it moves, which can sometimes lead to traffic jams if you have multiple tractors operating close to each other. But it can be a very effective way to have more than one field being worked on at a time. Now, it's not free to do this. Hiring an AI worker will cost you a small amount of money over time. Next to the top right, they're getting a small wage. If you have those refill things ticked on that I showed you earlier, that will tick faster, but they'll automatically do things like refill tanks inside fertilizer machinery. They'll refill the fuel on your vehicle. It's up to you, but personally I prefer to do that manually when I need to. Also, just to show off, yes, the AI is smart enough to go around corners. I was only taking it around that previous one because I got stuck, but yes, occasionally it will do slightly odd things like climbing the terrain or failing to make turns or getting stuck on vehicles. It's rare, and it tends to be more with modded machinery or if there's a lot of, say, trees around the edge of your field, but it's something to keep an eye on. I should also quickly mention this box because I just realised the script I have written up for this doesn't actually mention them anyway. One of the items you could buy is counterweights. Some equipment is perfectly usable by the machine you have, but it's too heavy to, like, just put it on one end of the machine and leave it. It might be lifting your steering wheels off the ground, for example. So you could buy these counterweights to stabilise the vehicle. So, field's been ploughed, or in the case of this example, partially ploughed. We're ready to go now, right? No, not quite. There's a bit more to do before we start planting. The next step we need to check is, does the field need any lime? This one, like ploughing, is technically an optional step, although needing lime is required by default. On your map display, which you can change here, you can see what stages of growth or what crops you've got planted, your fields are in, etc. If it's this, well, turquoise colour, you need to put lime down. Lime is like it's not the fruit, it's like a rock powder. It's the same stuff. I believe it's literally limestone dust, effectively. And in the case of your fields, it's used as a treatment. If your fields don't have any lime on them, I believe you'll lose... I think, if I'm remembering correctly, ploughing is 10% yield loss, and lime is 20%, but you can check it if you're unsure like I am, because if you hit this little icon up here in the menu, you can look up information on all this stuff. It's a reasonably good explanation, but I feel like I'll still do this guide regardless, because I feel like actually seeing it in person could explain it a bit more. So if we go down to lime, wherever that is, I'm pretty sure it is pulled up. Improving yield. Oh yes, lime every 3 harvests gives you plus 15% of your yield. Ploughing is minus 15% if you don't plough. Weeding is minus 20%, and fertilizer can give you up to 50%. And you're going to want to do this. Seeds are not hugely expensive. You could technically go your entire game and just completely ignore the other things, just buy seeds, just grow the crops. But firstly, you're probably going to spend a lot of time doing nothing. And secondly, you will lose a lot of the additional yield that you can get. And the yields are not huge. As of real life, farming is a lot of hard work for not an enormous reward necessarily. It's not the easiest to make money necessarily. Again, it's a little easier on the settings I've got. It's specifically why I have them. I feel like the game is occasionally a little too punishing on the default settings. But yes, so we're going to need lime. And for that, we're going to need I believe they are fertilizer spreaders. Which I thought they're on the menu, but they are not, apparently. Fertilizer. Yes. This particular one won't. If you see these little icons here, that shows you what you can load into your machines. But both of these two in the base game and a whole bunch of equipment in the mods can spread lime. Now, I will quickly drive out to the shop and get one of those, and we'll be back in a moment. So we're at the store, and I figure I'll also quickly, seeing as we'll need to, go over buying things. As said, you can either access the store by pressing the P key, or you can literally just run up to this little shop icon outside the store and press the R key. We're going to buy the little K105. We don't necessarily need a big one. We're only on a small farm. This is the buying screen. And you'll notice that we get some options. You can actually customize your vehicles a bit. How much you can customize each one varies quite significantly. There's literally no point me going over all of them to try them out. For the most part, the main things that will make a difference on your various machines are wheels. Narrow wheels, specifically. If you have crop destruction turned on, narrow wheels, which can be fitted to vehicles and some piece of equipment, will not destroy crops. So while they cost a little bit more and they're a little unsteadier, especially on some tractors, and have less traction, there is a good reason you might want them. You could also vary things like the capacity of some machines, shown by this number here. So, for example, I can have this great big stack and suddenly it holds a whole bunch more. Or in some rare cases, you can even be like, oh, this will spray lime over a 12-meter distance. No, it won't. It's an 18-meter distance now. We'll have this one. We'll have a small spreader that can quickly do a large area. And you'll need to fill it. This is actually one of the criticisms I have of the base game. So you buy things from the objects menu. Buy a big bag of lime. We have a capacity of, I believe, 7,000. So we'll need 4 of these to fill our machine. You can, again, check from the garage. 9,000 even. Okay, so we'll need 5 of these. Unfortunately, there's no quick way to buy more than one bag at once. You just have to manually do it a few times. It's a minor criticism, but it is annoying, especially with some of the larger machines that can hold quite a substantial amount of things. It's very easily fixed with mods. A lot of them will add things like silos or buy points, where you can specifically just buy one thing in particular, and it will fill up like a silo will fill a wagon with crops. But I believe it's worth mentioning. Apologies for the cost today. I think I've got a bit of a blood throat. So, once you've attached your machine, when you drive near enough to a crop, to something you can fill the machine with, you'll notice that there is a little R key saying refill fertilizer spreader in the top left. And you can press that button to fill up your machine. You can also usually press the I key with most machines to unload them, which will automatically effectively respawn the containers you bought them in and dump them out. And this does work if your container is only half full, for example. If you're going to spawn a whole bag, it will just spawn a bag with a bit less of it. Also, as a small note, I severely doubt anyone particularly needs to hear this, but if you didn't know, lime in real life is very bad for you. It's not a good idea to breathe it in, and it's not a good idea to get it on your skin if you can avoid it, especially when it's wet. So if for some reason you're either a real farmer and you didn't know that, for whatever bizarre reason, or if you're, I don't know, like a small child or something, just don't do that. Believe me, it is not worth it. So, as with, well, slightly different to the subsoiler actually. For equipment like this, once you're in place, you want to unfold it. If it's a piece of equipment that unfolds, the X key, and press the B key to activate it. Line spreaders will run while, as long as they're active, and they will dump lime the whole time they're running. While seeders will not seed if you're not moving over ground you haven't already put a crop on. Lime and fertilizer and herbicide spreaders, and I believe manure and digestate probably as well. All the sprayers effectively will use their ingredient while you're not on the field, so you'll want to be a little bit careful. I'm making a tiny bit of a mess of this, but as you can see, lime and fertilizer spreading, which also has very wide applicators, is a fairly quick job, and it's one that's reasonably forgiving, which is good because it can be a little bit hard to tell what the actual working width of your tools is until you've used them a little bit. It'll also normally be a little bit neater than that, but that'll do for this little demonstration. So, are we ready to harvest now? Well, very nearly, but there's one more thing I'm going to show you before we get to that point. Now, as I showed you before, to get this field ready to plant in, I used a plough on it. But you actually don't have to plough, and a lot of the time you actually won't want to specifically. What you'd rather do normally is cultivate it if you can. Cultivators tend to be larger, lighter, and require less horsepower and be faster. They're all around better than ploughs. They just don't actually plough the soil. Normally ploughs actually leave the soil in a sort of lumpy state as well. Or not lumpy, ridges. I guess subsoilers maybe don't do that. I thought they did, but apparently I too have learned today. Which could be a bit more difficult to keep going straight on. Cultivators, however, like the subsoiler, will leave the soil in this sort of flat state that seems to be well. Because cultivators themselves, again, have so much lower requirements and work faster, I usually recommend that you actually cultivate between each crop and only plough when you specifically need to. However, ploughs, I should mention quickly before we go on to the next bit, can also do one thing that your normal equipment can't. And cultivate subsoilers, as I've also just learned today, apparently also can't do this. Ploughs can actually be set to enable creation of new fields. What this means is, as long as you've got them active and you're on ground you own, you can activate them and it will literally create more farmland like that. One thing I actually recommend new players maybe try with that is on this particular map, combine these two fields. If you start to get wider equipment later anyway, the AI will occasionally think that they're one field anyway and bridge the gap. So I actually sometimes recommend just plough over that middle section and actually combine them into one big field. And lastly, I should very quickly also mention that while cultivators cultivate the soil, these ones specifically, they're not technically the only machine that does that. While there doesn't seem to be any gameplay difference at all, or at least as far as like what they actually do is concerned, you can also use disc harrows and power harrows, and they will do exactly the same thing. They will cultivate the soil ready for farming on. In real life, I believe there's certain advantages to using some of this equipment. I think power harrows can really break up really stubborn soil. Disc harrows maybe go deeper than normal cultivators, which you need for certain soil types. But in Farm Simulator, they're considered exactly the same thing. So, we're finally ready to plant, or at least you will be, so long as you've got yourself a planter or a seeder. I'll go into the differences between those in just a moment. And filled it up with seeds in the same way that you do the bags of lime, although I believe their pallets of seed are bought under the pallet section. So now you've got to ask yourself what you want to grow. Well, depending on whether you have a seeder or a planter, that will affect what you can grow. Seeders tend to focus on the... I don't technically know the name for them, but your wheat and barley, well, it says here wheat, barley, oats, canola, soybeans, oilseed radish, I think, and grass. Whereas planters, with a few exceptions that could do more than one thing, focus on some of the other crop types. So corn, sunflowers, soybeans again, sugar beets, and cotton. Additionally, some machines can do both, basically. Some, additionally, can also bring fertilizer in them and can fertilize your field at the same time. While some machinery also, I believe these are seeders particular, has a cultivator built into the machine. It can cultivate at the same time as it grows stuff. While these machines tend to be a bit heavier and have slightly higher horsepower requirements, as you can see, or might be pricier, this can actually be a good way to save yourself some money by buying a machine that will do both at once. Once your manure spreader is filled up and in place, you're ready to start spreading it. It's basically the same process as with the lime. Unfold your machine, get into place, and press the B key to enable spreading. Fertilizing, normally, if you're using the cleaner fertilizers, will leave the field like a dark colour, like wet. But in the case of manure, it leaves this sort of brown sludge behind. Well, I suppose it's manure behind. Again, I'm making a bit of a mess of this. You can be as neat as you like, but you'll notice, as before, manure is spread all the time the machine is on. So you probably realistically want to turn it off when you get to the corner so you don't waste any. Once you've got the field done once, you're not done yet. You have to do each field, as I think the game maybe even mentioned itself, twice with fertilizer. But you can't just do it twice straight away. If you try to put another load of fertilizer of any sort on immediately, you'll just waste it. Rather, what you have to do is put on a separate thing of fertilizer after a growth cycle has passed. Basically, if, for example, like here, there's no crops in the field and you put one load on, the moment you see grass or wheat or whatever it is you planted, whenever you see your crop poking up above the soil, that's when you're good to go again. Now, fertilizing is probably also the step I'd recommend you skip the least. You can skip weeding, you can skip lime, you can skip ploughing, and you won't lose too much. Fertilizer, you lose a lot. So I strongly recommend whatever method you pick, you do at least do it. But solid fertilizer isn't the only option. You can also use liquid fertilizer, and there's two different forms of liquid fertilizer. Once again, there is a smelly and a non-smelly option. I'll go pick up a couple of those. Right. I also figured while I was doing that to save me a bit of time for this video, hauling stuff up and down, I'd quickly go over tractors before we get to that next point. Tractors, as you've seen, effectively have only a few stats that matter. Their horsepower and their speed. But there's also a few things that might not be so obvious immediately. What a tractor actually needs to manipulate things is usually a 3-point linkage, this thing at the back, and also a PTO linkage, I believe they're called. Most tractors should have a 3-point linkage and a PTO on the back. In fact, I'm not sure there's any that don't, even though they're less obvious. But not so many have one on the front, like this one here. The 3-point linkage is these 3 arms, while the PTO is this yellow thing. A tractor with a PTO on the front can have effectively 2 bits of equipment fixed onto it, not just one. So occasionally you might want to consider that when you're buying a new tractor. As also mentioned, they'll also have a horsepower, which is how effectively big equipment you can put on it. And they'll have a maximum speed. Now, the maximum speed is actually not too much of an issue once you're pootling around the fields. For example, the little Fiat DT that you start with, it only does 15 miles an hour, and that really doesn't matter on the little farm on a Ravensport, I believe we're on. Literally, that's fast enough. Most equipment can't run at 15 miles an hour. Most of it runs around about 10, if not slower, like 8. So that's perfectly fine. But on the roads, waiting for that to haul around could be a bit painful. So I also recommend, if you're going to have 2 tractors, you might consider having one that's maybe like, you can usually get the slower ones for a little bit less. And maybe one slightly faster one that'll do about 30 at least for the roads. In this case, I'm going to buy this bigger fast tractor. Also go over some of the options you'll get on tractors. The wheel brand lets you sometimes change which types of wheels you can put on, which is road wheels, wide tyres, or if you take the default options, you can actually change them up a little bit. You'll sometimes get weighted tyres, which are a bit grippier and act as counterweights on their own, and also narrow tyres. Wide tyres are used for, what do you call it, compressing silage, and we'll get to that later on. But weighted wide tyres are the best for that. I'll also bring up quickly that while they are technically divided into large, small, and medium sizes tractors, it doesn't actually change anything. It's literally just kind of the size class they're in, but the larger ones universally have more horsepower. I should also mention that speaking of horsepower, one of the things you could also commonly affect with tractors is a lot of them will have optional engine sizes. This is not one of them, but a lot of tractors will have an option to go from the base horsepower to maybe like anything up from like 50 to maybe even like 100 or 80 horsepower above the base option. And you don't have to buy it straight away. You can customize your tractors either by bringing them to a garage, I believe that's one down there with that little icon, or by building a workshop, putting it on your farm. So another thing you might consider with tractors is one that's very versatile. You can adjust them with. So, liquid fertilizer. Liquid fertilizing tools tend to be reasonably lightweight, not necessarily cheap, but they can be cheap. Some of them can have expansion tanks bought for them to, well, increase the amount of liquid they can carry. And they tend to have wide working arms, able to do a lot of the field at once. Additionally, I believe all of these machines, yes, can have herbicide loaded into them, so they can either spread fertilizer or weed killer. You'll need to buy pallets of liquid fertilizer, and liquid fertilizer is not cheap. I actually think I remember hearing it's actually a little bit more expensive, like litre for litre, than solid fertilizer, but it is usually much more convenient, and it's also I was about to say lighter. Actually, no, I tell a lie. I don't believe that's the case. But the containers it comes in hold of. As usual, move up to the machinery, fill yourself up, and then get yourself down to your field ready to spread. Seeing as in game it's getting a bit dark on my drive back to the farm, I figured I'd also mention a few small things. You can return to your farmhouse for the night to sleep and skip some of the night. This will allow crops to grow in the meantime, so if there's something that needs your attention quickly, it might be worth not doing that straight away. But you can do so. You don't have to wait around the dark where you can't see anything. You can also press the F key on your keyboard to light up the tractor's lights. And if you want those big fancy lights on the roof going, you could press the home key to turn on your beacons. You don't have to, it's just a thing you can do. As with the solid fertilizer spray, you'll need to unfold it. And as mentioned before, a lot of the liquid fertilizing equipment has very wide arms on it. It should be able to do a lot of your field at once. Oh. Yep. Once it's fully unfurled, as before, you press the B key, it'll start to drain. And you can spray it on the fields. Liquid fertilizer, while more expensive, is actually quite potent. You don't use quite as much of it on the fields. So you may even be able to disregard what I said earlier. I'd forgotten just how little of this you actually use. It might actually be, if not more efficient than solid fertilizer, fairly close. Again, I've played a fair bit, but I've never gone too into the details because it seems to work well enough. It's never been so cost-worthy that I couldn't afford to do either, or that I felt like one was using up my entire budget. I've probably also noticed that the crop's starting to grow, but there's also little green bits among them, and what look like dandelions. Probably are dandelions, because there's also weeds to consider. I'll go over those in a little bit, but there's two more fertilizing options that I want to quickly go over first, and we'll get to one of those in a minute. So, here we have the smellier of the two liquid options. This is what's called a slurry tank. I assume it's short for slurry tanker, but anyway, slurry tank is what the game is. To fill these, you'll need digestate, which is a liquid you get either from keeping cows, specifically just cows, or from operating a biogas plant. Effectively, this stuff is made from grass in the long run, either way. So it's actually very cheap, but it does need specific setups to actually harvest it. And as mentioned there, it can be either liquid manure or a sort of slurry from fermenting grass. As with the actual equipment, and this is admittedly one I've not used before, but I'm aware of how these work. I've never had a setup that actually used slurry tankers, but I believe they are quite a cheap way to fertilize. You unfold them, which I thought I had done. So unfolded. I got to lower them as well. My bad. And I press the B button to activate them. It's fairly simple stuff. This isn't actually technically doing anything for this field at this point, but it's fertilized. There's also one last option for fertilizing your fields, and that is to crush the previous crop back into the dirt from which it came. There's even one crop specifically designed for that, oilseed radish. So I did have that over. This crop is ready to go as soon as you see the leaves above ground, and that happens pretty quickly. I believe it's the fastest growing crop, but it can't really be harvested on its own. Once it's grown to this point, all you have to simply do is get your ground preparing tool of choice, in this case the subsoiler was to hand, and run across the whole field. And that will give you the same amount of fertilization as one application of fertilizer. It's quite a cheap way to do it because seeds are not very expensive, but it's a bit more time and work consuming because you have to go over the field more times. Now, there is one last thing that your crops need, or rather, specifically, do not want. And that is weeds. Weeds, as I showed you earlier, start as dandelions, but they grow into those little multicoloured flowers that you can see there. Weeds will actively take away from the amount of money you make. Well, or rather, the amount of yield you get from them. So you'll want to get rid of them. There's two ways to do this. First of all, there are weeders, which are these machines. These will only work while your crops are in that first, like, dandelion-looking state. Or the weeds, rather, are in that first state. Once they grow beyond that, weeders won't do anything. But they're reasonably cheap, cover a decent distance, and don't have very big horsepower requirements at all. Now, I don't usually tend to go for those, because I usually lose track of time and miss them. But they can be a perfectly good option. But what I prefer to do is to use Herbicide. Now, it's literally not so good for the environment in real life, but of course we don't have to worry about that in this game. Herbicide, again, can be loaded into most of the machines that contain fertilizer, using exactly the same, or literally in this case. But you'll notice once I spray over the weeds, they go brown and immediately perish. Get what you deserve, weeds. Get what you deserve. So, with your weeds done, is the field finally ready to just leave it to grow? Yes, congrats. Actually, genuinely, yeah. That's what you need to do. At that point, you can leave the crop to finish growing. Once it's grown, you'll need to roll out the harvester. Get that for a moment, because I should also mention that you actually don't want to wait too long. If you have crop withering turned on, your crops will actually die off after a while. It does take a while, depending on how fast your growing speed is set to. So it's not super easy for that to happen by accident, but it can, and it's worth pointing out. I believe once they're withered, you get very minimal yield, and if you wait too long, I think they just completely die off and you get nothing from them at that point. The only thing they're good for, and they will at least do this, is mulching them back into the ground. First of all, we'll rescue this Hapless Helper. We'll ready this farm up with a bit of the old debug magic, this field up. And we'll do a little bit of harvesting and show how that works. But of course, what you'll need for that... Yeah, wheat field, please. Growth state, I believe that's done. Right. No, that's withered. That's what withered wheat looks like anyway. It's this sort of horrible grey colour. 6. There we go. Ready to harvest. So for harvesting, you will need a combine harvester. There's two main flavours of combine harvester. But there are a few extras and exceptions, but for the most part, they are two types. The regular combine harvesters, like this New Holland TX32 that you start with, and the Forage Harvester. We'll start with these and explain these ones first. So, to use them, you've got to unfold them, set whether you want them to drop a straw swath or not. The straw swath you'll see in a moment. And then lower the blade and harvest it. Harvest blade will munch up the crop. Back end of it will start to either drop straw if you've got the swath enabled, or if you have it disabled, will spread it evenly and leave nothing. And the internal capacity of the machine, as you can probably see in the bottom right there, will start to fill up with the proper harvester. Now, that's if you're using a regular harvester. The other type, as I mentioned earlier, the Forest Harvesters. I will quickly go fetch one to show off what they do. This machine here is a pretty good example of a Forage Harvester. They're quite big machines, actually. They tend to be larger than most of the regular combines, at the very least, with the capacity usually to tow a trailer. Not really how they're used in real life, carrying their own trailer, but it is certainly an option. Although in the base game there's not an enormous amount of trailers that are kind of compatible with them, is the way I would describe it. Oh yeah, she's just sent an example of the traffic there. We'll get to that later, but yes, the AI's noticed. Yes, we'll take this down to the field, but while we go, to explain the way forage harvesters, different thing, forage harvesters work, is that they are effectively a giant, as you can probably tell by that slightly lethal looking sort of the blades, mincing machine. Rather than harvesting a crop in the traditional sense, they basically shred it to pieces. From this you get a substance called chaff. Although I believe from the crop that gives you the most chaff, which is corn, it should technically be called maize, which is apparently where a lot of crisps come from. I didn't know that before I started playing this game, but I do now. It's also mentioned that the reason I've got this trailer is because forage harvesters can't store crops on board. I really don't know quite why they can't. It seems like the equipment's all there, whether they need a larger power plant for their shredders maybe, or the space taken up by the shredders, I don't know. But yes, you have to have a trailer nearby to offload into. If you don't, and you've got the AI driving them, after a certain point I believe they just stop until you give them a trailer to unload into. While the AI can... While the AI can do that with a trailer, what I would normally recommend, and I believe this is what they do in real life, because they mostly, I believe, get reserved for the larger fields, often in the US. The way they tend to run them is to have a tractor following along, basically. Oh dear, the other half's got some stuff. We'll get a field set up for a quick demonstration in a moment. And as usual, the tools are reasonably similar to operate, although there's one extra step you may need to take with Forage Harvesters, in this case two. If you're carrying a trailer, you'll want to take the cover off if it's got one with the N key. Then for your harvester, you'll want to unfold the header. Is that ready for position? Not all headers can be folded. Usually the reason you would want to fold them is for transit, so you're not pressing into things on the road. You'll also need to unfold the pipe, the O key. Should automatically point towards the nearest trailer. And then press the B key to enter the machine. It'll automatically shred the crop into, well, it's going to chaff. It's pretty simple, really. Chaff itself is not worth a huge amount as a crop. I believe it does have some value. But there is something useful you could do, which we'll get to later. One last thing we'll think to mention with harvesters. Once you are harvesting, obviously eventually you'll fill up. Now, you can either drive up to a trailer to offload into and press the O key to unfold the arm, or, because the AI is reasonably smart, you can take a tractor out with a trailer, and as long as you drive alongside, do that in a minute once it's turned around, try to go this way because the AI will think we're blocking him and stop. Okay, so if you drive alongside, the arm on the combine will automatically open and you'll be able to unload it. I believe if you're unloading when you get to the end of a row, it will stop and wait until it's fully offloaded before it starts moving again. I think that's how that works. As you can see, when I get close to him, the arm will unfold and you can work him. Fabulous. If you have certain mods, like the Follow Me mod or Horseplay, you can actually automate this stuff, and it's actually quite fun once you get it working. It can be quite a time saver, especially if you go to the effort of Horseplay, which it can be a bit janky. Trust me, I've done it. While it can be a bit janky, with Horseplay you can even actually set your AI up to not only offload automatically, but to even take it to one of your silos and store it. And speaking of, once you have your crop, your wonderful money-making crop, you can either sell it straight away by taking it to a point on the map where you can sell it, or store it temporarily in whatever silos you have and sell it at a later date. The prices do vary a little bit over time, so sometimes you might want to, for example, wait for a more favourable deal. Or there'll occasionally be flash demands where a crop is worth more for a certain amount of time. If you've saved a lot of this up and choose that time to sell it, you can actually make a lot of money off of that. But it's random. There's no telling when one's going to happen or what it's going to be. So it's a little bit of a... There's no like inverse option like a surplus where it's worth less. That's not happening. However, for all types of harvesting, I think the last thing I have to mention is that I believe there is no field-grown crop apart from maybe grass that you can harvest in the rain. If it's raining, your machines simply... They maybe do, but they just destroy the crop, but I think they literally just don't work. So those five, or that method I've just shown you rather, is kind of the base crops for the game. And they're what you'll be doing most of the time. If you want to harvest sunflowers or corn, and you're not making chaff out of them, they use the same harvesters as the rest, but you'll need corn headers. The blades and the harvesters don't come as one thing. They come off and you can swap them out. The corn headers will cut either corn or sunflowers. That's literally it. There's not much difference. The crops themselves are not enormously different in price to the other types of crops. It's more a different option than necessarily either of them being better. Sugarcane, however, is a crop that actually is technically quite a bit different. You plant it with different equipment and you harvest it in different ways. The Sugarcane Planters, there's only... I tell a lie, there are 3 of them. I believe there are only 2. These machines are filled with actual sugarcane. In fact, I'll buy one now and show it off. Rather than seeds. Sugarcane is bought in pallets and it's cheap. Although you'll need a few of these pallets to machine up. I'll just grab a few. Other than that, the actual process of planting itself is exactly the same as before. Check your fields all good, fertilize it, etc. It just needs, again, a slightly different feed. Once you get it planted, though, it becomes a little different. Unlike the other crops in the base game, oh, the other thing as well is that it's solid, so it kind of swings about in the back of the tractor. It's actually a lot easier to handle in reverse than the other machines. But yes, once you've planted the sugarcane, it is a lot slower to grow. However, it actually regrows on itself. Actually, don't really need to show off planting it. It's the same. The planting machines are quite narrow. They don't plant a huge amount in one go. But yeah. But yes, once you've again harvested sugarcane, it will actually grow back after a short, well, I say a short period of time. No, it takes the same amount of time to grow, and it is longer than the other crops, but you don't have to plant it again immediately. And you actually, because again, you use sugarcane for the planter, you can chuck a little bit of your crop into the machine when you do have to replant it, well, replant it. Now, I believe once it's in, you do need to plough the ground again before any other crop will be good to grow in it, and I think you do need to maybe do it after a few harvests anyway. Don't quote me on that. But yes, to harvest sugarcane, you'll need either the tow-along SWT7, and this is the only towed one in the base game, which is very narrow. I should mention it's a as I say, it's awkward. No, it's a pain in the backside to use. It's extremely narrow. It's not a fast process sugarcane harvesting, made slower by the fact that while you can tow along these quite high volume trailers, the thing is, they actually fill up very quickly because sugarcane is one of the crops in the game that are low cost, high yield. You get a huge amount of them, but they're heavy. Or not heavy, but they're bulky, I should say. There is also one other option for sugarcane harvesting, which is the Allstuffed. This rather monstrous looking machine. I mean, look at those drills. We'll harvest 2 rows at once. It's a lot better width, although 2 meters is very little. The biggest combine harvesters are, I think, up to about 14 meters. Have a quick look. Yeah, they're almost at 14 meters, so it's a very small harvester, especially for how much it costs, which is not cheap. Now, while it can technically have a trailer hitch on it to tow trailers, this is a booby trap. Don't do it. There's only a few trailers it can haul in general, even with mods, because this arm doesn't look like it would be in the way, but trust me, this arm is in the way of your trailers. Rather, like with forage harvesters, if you want to use these, what I genuinely suggest, because this will pivot, it can go from side to side, bring a trailer, babysit it, drive along next to it, and offload as it goes. It can't store a huge amount inside itself. In fact, it looks like it can't store anything inside itself. So if you want to use this thing, let the AI drive it and follow alongside it with a trailer. And just to quickly show off, sugarcane looks like this when it's fully grown. It's very tall. Yeah, you could very easily get yourself lost in one of those fields. As you cut, it will obviously sever and however easy to see in, but it is an interesting little side feature of it. Still, one thing that sugarcane also shares in conjunction with some of the other crops is that storing it's weirdly difficult because it won't go in your silos. Yeah, I don't know quite why they decided this, or maybe it's in real life, maybe they don't really build silos for them, but you actually, if you want to store it, either have to just leave it in a machine, either a trailer, one of the specific sugarcane trailers, or if you've got one kicking around, maybe an auger wagon. Nope, I tell a lie, auger wagons can't even carry sugarcane, ignore me on that one. So most of the time, you'll probably have to resort to storing them on the ground and scooping them up with maybe a wheel loader bucket. And there's another crop, or rather a pair of crops that are very similar to that. Potatoes and sugar beets. Potatoes likewise have their own harvesters. Planters. These two. And I will double check this, because I may be talking out of my backside, but I believe planters can also plant potatoes. No, they do sugar beets. Okay. Again, there's a lot to remember in this game. I do often have to reminding myself about things work. Potatoes, once more, are planted with these fairly narrow planters, although at 6 meters, they're a lot better than sugarcane are, and that's something to be glad of, because potatoes are usually something you'll do in bulk, if you're doing them at all. Once potatoes are grown, They're grown like any other crop, it's just they need their own planters. To actually harvest them, you'll need to cut the vegetation off the top, the leaves. One of these halum toppers like this little is it KS75-4 will do that. And then you're ready to pull them out of the ground using either one of these two toed potato diggers. For whatever reason, this one is like 0.2 of a meter less than the other one. I think I heard a story somewhere that these machines, a lot of the potato and sugar beet machines, were designed by the same guy, which is why they look very similar and work fairly similar. There's literally the same engineer worked them out, but he worked for two different companies. Something along those lines, I believe. But there's also the option, and I'll actually recommend this option for the case of potatoes at least, of using one of the dedicated harvesters. Now, why would I recommend a dedicated harvester? Well, aside from the fact it's got a halum topper on the front of it, so it will automatically do that for you. First of all, the internal storage is bigger, and potatoes are, again, extremely high yield, but they're not worth much at all, so you will need a lot of storage space. If a trailer says it'll hold 8,000, that's 8,000 of anything, not 8,000 wheat or 8,000 potatoes. It is the same either way. However, the main reason I'd recommend, at the very least, the potato hauler, or harvester, is because these two, you might notice the working width is different. 3 and a bit meter halum topper, but only a 1.8 meter potato digging ramp scoop thing. These things, anyway. Now that matters because the AI will use the largest tool. While you can quite happily put a halum topper on the front of a machine and a harvester on the back, you'll actually get problems with that because the AI will leave strips every other row, which is a right pain. It's not the worst to clean up afterwards because you can at least follow back along those strips and it's a little bit easier to follow, but it is something to keep in mind. Sugar beets, however, also need their own machinery, and like the harvesters, show off it, they're pretty enormous bits of machinery and hold a lot more in their own internal storage than the potato machines do. Yeah, you'll need headers. You might notice these machines are expensive, they're not cheap, the purpose-built harvesters. However, one thing I should mention is, don't make the mistake Markiplier did. For those that haven't seen his Let's Play, he bought himself, when they were doing sugar beet, a Terraphilis. He bought one of these, mistakenly reading the description as meaning that it was a harvester. And while it sure looks like it is one, it's not. Rather, because again you can't store sugar beets or potatoes in silos in this game, what you're kind of supposed to do is pile them up. The Terraphilis and the mouths are collectors. They're meant to very quickly scoop up a big pile of potatoes, or, well, sorry, not potatoes, sugar beets, and load them into a trailer. And poor Mark didn't know that, and got yelled at a lot. So yeah, don't make a mistake. I don't know. I guess I could recommend these if you're going to go for an extended playthrough with sugar beets and potatoes, but they are extremely expensive machines if you're not. In fact, these actually can't even hold potatoes, so keep that in mind as well. They only pick up sugar beans. Yes, sugar beans. That's definitely a thing. Sugar beets. Although one thing I should quickly mention is that while they're extremely expensive to buy, with machines this expensive, you might consider leasing them. I'm leasing this one in particular because I want to show it off, because it looks like a transformer, frankly, when this thing's in motion. Leasing a machine will cost you a bit of money, typically only a tiny fraction, though, of what its full cost would be. And it'll cost you a bit to rent, and the more you use it, it'll also cost a little bit. But you can return them at no price later on. This can be a good way to do specific tasks. If, for example, you buy a new field that's got a crop or something you can't harvest, it might be a reasonable idea to hire a header or whatnot. See? Or transformer. Or again, for specific tasks like this, you might consider getting a huge haul of potatoes or sugar beets stored on the ground, and then just only hire this machine when you need it. Look at this thing. It's very cool. Look at this machine, even if it feels hugely overbuilt to me, even if I am a big fan of overbuilt machines. The next specialised crop is cotton. There's literally only one machine that will harvest cotton, and I believe even with mods, there's only 3, as far as I'm aware, cotton harvesters, and one of those is from the official DLC. For some reason, there's not a huge amount to it. I don't know whether there are only a few cotton harvesters in real life, but they're planted. I believe with planters, yeah. So they're not. It's probably the easiest unique crop I would argue to spec into. It needs only one specific machine. Now it's not cheap, but cotton's actually quite valuable if you've got the space to grow it, because you do need quite a lot to make a bale. Because this machine is a baler. He's a big square chunky boy. What he does once it's running is it will harvest cotton from the front. You don't need to buy a header for it because it comes with one built in. The cotton harvested will be shoved into the back and effectively, I might as well show it off quickly, compressed into a giant cotton bale, like a straw bale but much larger. So fold it quickly to give you an idea of how big that cotton bale would be. I thought I could unload it, but apparently I can't. Sure, take me. Actually, wait, yes I can. What am I doing? I've got the debug menu. Oh, could be. I guess I could show you viewers what it's like. There we go. Make sure you've filled up the bale, and this takes a while. Again, you need a lot of cotton to make a single bale, but there's 20,000 cotton in each one, so they're worth 20 times whatever the sale price is. Because the sale price is, to show that quickly, got this cotton bale. The sale prices on the options menu, it also, this game has autosave. As you've probably seen, it's not too bad when you don't have mods, but it can take a few seconds when you have mods on. The way the game does the sale prices is per 1,000 of the crop. This here shows how much you've got in your silos. This shows how much space you've got in the silo for it. And these prices here show what they're worth. If you click on the crop, it'll sort it by the most valuable first. And the green arrow means that the price is going up at the moment, while the red arrow means it's going down. To actually do anything with cotton, though, we'll quickly turn the harvester. You'll need to haul it off to a sell point, and you need specific equipment for this. So, I tell a lie, cotton does need one extra bit of equipment at least. Now, these bales are quite large, so you can only really haul either one or two at once. The Module 4, which again is not hugely expensive, at only 25,000, it's nothing compared to the harvester, and not even particularly expensive as implements go in this game, will carry a single bale, or, and we'll get onto lorries now, because this is the first thing I've mentioned that needs a lorry, the Modulo, or the Module X, will carry 2 bales. Now, lorries. Some machines can only be pulled by trucks, or a dolly mount, which is a little, effectively, a little wheel that connects a tractor hitch to a lorry. I guess hitch is the right word for that as well. Lorries, or trucks, I suppose. Oh yeah, American game, of course, for trucks. Are, well, you know what a lorry is. You probably see one driving out. It's a big old vehicle. In this game, they're kind of an alternate option, mostly for hauling. They can't really use much farm equipment. They can tow a few things around, but what they can do is haul some very large, in particular, very large trailers. Some of the largest ones in the base game. In fact, I think the largest one in the base game is, yeah, the largest one in the base game is the Pace Setter, which is a lorry trailer. And they will haul them much faster. Most tractors cap out at about 30 miles an hour. I think the Fast Track is the fastest base game tractor at about 45. Most of the lorries can do about 50. Yeah, most of them will do 50, and they're cheaper than the biggest tractors. Additionally, there's also a few very specific bits of equipment they can use, like low loaders, or the single base game low loader, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a low loader that you can load your other vehicles onto. So, for example, if you're shipping around, say, I don't know, say you bought a couple of Fiat DTs, they only do 50 miles an hour, you'd have to run each one out to the farm manually, or you can load them onto one of those trailers. So if you've got a farm that's a long way from the spawn, for example, for the shop spawn rather, that can be a worthwhile little investment. We'll also just talk a little bit about a few of the harvest options for the forest shedders, because I feel it's worth mentioning, and also one last slightly strange crop type. It's not the last crop type in the game, but it's probably the weirdest one. This little MX-5 is a trailed forage header. It's designed to be pulled behind, or rather I should say pushed in front of, a tractor. It's exactly the same as the other forage headers, but much lighter weight, and because it's pulled by a tractor, I'm pretty sure with that arm you could carry a trailer behind it and offload yourself a little more easily. It's a cheap little alternative to a full-size forage header, but a lot smaller. Next, we have the weirdest crop type and the only harvester in the game for it, the Poplar. Poplars are a sort of small tree thing. They look kind of like a twiggy bush in this when they're fully grown. And they give you wood chips. Yeah, I'm pretty sure wood chips are like the least valuable crop in the game. And I have to admit, I've never fully understood this. Actually, I tell you, they might be worth a bit more than grass. But yeah, I think I tried poplar harvesting all of once and went, I don't quite get it. Yeah, they're a very weird option, but it is an option that's out there. I think they only even fit on one harvester. But along with these, there's also the various mowers. Or at least I believe they're mowers. I actually can't 100% remember, but I believe these are in fact collectors. Yes, in fact, I think these are the collectors. So if you have a swath of grass or straw, or actually I think that might just be grass and silage, these could drive over them and pick it up. They'll scoop it into a forage header and then can chuck it straight into a trailer. Yeah, these ones, meanwhile, are cutters for some of the more standard crops. They look a bit like lawnmowers, but that isn't actually what they are. Now, finally onto the last proper crop. Not counting trees just yet. We'll get to those. Grass. Yeah, grass. It seems like an odd thing, but grass actually has a lot of uses to you as a farmer. And there are actually pretty good reasons you might want to grow it. You cut it with mowers. There are specific mowing vehicles, or rather I believe, yeah, by default there is one specific mowing vehicle, the Big M. Yeah, look at this guy. Crone make a lot of the grass harvesters, that they tend to be a little on the steep side. Or you can buy mowers to fit to your vehicle. These ones, I believe this is a trail one that sits in the centre, I think. Or it might slide off to the side, I forget. This one folds out. This one's pushed in front of your vehicle, and you can use it in conjunction with this one that goes behind your vehicle and will extend the amount you can harvest at once. Horsepower requirements are fairly, as you can see, fairly lightweight on grass cutting. Cutting the grass, well, yeah, cutting the grass will give you grass. I don't think anyone's too surprised by that, but there are reasons you'll want to do this. First of these reasons is that grass is by far the easiest crop to do in the game. It, I believe, starts half fertilised, and it automatically regrows between harvests like sugarcane does, but it regrows back much faster. Additionally, while it is low value on its own, by using it to feed your animals, or for other use that we'll get back to later, it actually becomes one of the indirectly highest value crops in the game. Mowing, like the other machinery, requires you to unfold, lower and activate your equipment, and you will need to switch between it if you've got more than one mower. You can mow grass in your fields, or you can actually just mow random bits of grass around your farm. You actually don't need to specifically grow it on a field, although I believe the yield is higher. It's also fairly quick because there's very little resistance to it. However, as you can probably see, the grass is being left behind all over the place. Now this actually makes it a bit of a pain to collect. To do so, to collect grass, you either use loading wagons, which will scoop it directly up into their back off of the ground. You see they've got a little connecting spinner here, and they'll just chuck it straight into the back. You could use one of those forage harvesters I mentioned earlier, specifically with a collecting head on it, or you can use a baler. There's two different main types of baler, as it were. One of them which has a bale wrapper built into it. The roll belt will make you round bales, and is a little bit less convenient to use because you have to stop and unload each bale after it's filled up. The LSB produces square bales and can keep running indefinitely. It will just dump the last bale out the back as the next one pushes it out. I find square balers a lot easier to use, but you can't wrap them, at least not in the base game. The FBP will create round bales and it will automatically wrap them. Wrapping bales of grass turns them into silage, which we'll get to later. There's also a machine specifically designed to... No, I tell a lie, you can wrap square bales. You just have to do it separately. This machine will wrap the bales individually. Again, apparently I'm talking out my backside and forgetting things. And this equipment is used to, well, shift it around and store it. The full stack will pick up 3 bales, but and will pick up the square bales only. Tells you which sort here. The FSX will carry 16 bales and is generally what I'd actually recommend for shifting square bales around. The Schmetterling is a very cheap alternative and is perfectly serviceable for shifting, I believe, 2 round bales at once, I think is what it'll pick up. Yeah, and I recommend the way you work these is to use 2 of them and have one on the front and one on the back of your trailer. Effectively what you do is simply drive the bale between these prongs on each side and then press the button which will cause it to fold up and hold them in place. I actually used to completely ignore this until I tried it for a contract mission and actually really liked it, so I recommend that little tool, especially since it costs basically nothing. While this little wagon can hold a much larger amount of bales, so you'll have to stack them yourself. Now, as mentioned though, picking up grass is a bit of a pain because the collection head on these is only a certain width and it's not hugely wide. Same with the balers, they're about the same. But there is a way to make this easier for you. And that way is using a windrower. Windrowers are, as they probably look like, a giant rake. They'll, basically as you drive across the grass, they'll push it into neat little, well, rows. You can then follow along these rows with whatever your equipment is to collect them much faster. And I will show one of these off in action in a moment. You could also, while or before you windrow, and I'd suggest you do it before because I believe it spreads them back out again, use a tedder on grass. Tedders, which are also a little bit like a giant rake, but will turn the grass over to dry rather than neatening it up, will make the grass transform into hay. Now, I should also note you can't make silage out of hay while I say this. Additionally, windrowers will also work on hay and straw. So they can be and I think they possibly work on chaff as well, but I've never tried that. This makes it, again, much easier to collect most of these, but your harvesters will usually leave straw in a neat row anyway. So unless you've got loads of rows to do and you want to consolidate a few of them into one, you don't normally need to worry about that. I normally wouldn't also bother with this windrower due to the very small working size compared to the others that aren't much more expensive or need much more horsepower. In fact, this one actually needs less. I would recommend at least getting the SR314 because it works twice as wide. So, bring your windrower to the field, turn it on, and drive over. In fact, you can automate this, but this is often a task you might be better doing yourself. Because while the AI will go up and down in rows, what you as a human can do is, with a little bit of steering, you can go around in a big smooth circle that will be reasonably easy to follow. This way you can effectively bale in one continuous go and do the whole field in one shot. You don't have to do it like this, but it's kind of a way I recommend doing it. As you can see, windrowing is pretty quick. It's a reasonably easy task to do. But why would you gather all this grass, hay, straw, and whatever? Well, the main reason you would do so isn't to sell them. You can sell them. They're not worth much. Again, I think raw grass is the worst priced crop in the game. But again, what you're supposed to do is feed them to animals. There are 5 animals in the game by default. Chickens, sheep, cows, pigs, and horses. Chickens are nice and easy to keep. They eat wheat, drink water, and give you eggs in return. Water, I should mention, you ship around using tankers, which I think might just be in MISC by default. No. Animals. Yeah, there you go. The Aquatrans is used to get water. You can refill water from water towers on certain maps, your own water tanks, or I believe you could also just drive the back end into a river, and you could actually refill from that usually. All animals, as far as I'm aware, need water. Sheep will eat hay, and in exchange will give you pallets of wool. This wool, like the eggs you get from the chickens, can be sold for money. The wool is a little heavier than the eggs. With the eggs, I actually recommend you just yeet the box into the back of a pickup truck. Don't worry, they don't break. And yes, there are pickup trucks in this game. There's a couple. And the eggs can be sold at a certain point on the map for a little bit of money. It's a reasonable little amount. not awful. Sheep wool, meanwhile, will usually be taken to a spinnery, and it's actually worth a fairly decent amount. It's actually not a bad money spinner at all, considering they effectively slightly processed grass, which is not very difficult to set up. I should have mentioned at this point that animals do kick their food out the pen. In fact, I'll show you a pen quickly if I can find one. Is there one pre-built on this map? No, there isn't. Okay, we'll load one in. This map's going to start to look messy, but that's fine. Loaded the chicken coop. Oh, this is also a good time to highlight one particular flaw with the game. This is probably the biggest flaw it has. Placing buildings is a pain. There's not that many spots you can. But the biggest problem with it is when you do place it, yeah, it auto-levels the ground, and it has a bad habit of leaving these horrible steps everywhere. This is not normally too bad, but if you try to build a silo where you have to have a ramp to get up onto it to drop your crops off, you get a massive great bump with whatever your vehicles are that are driving over it, and it's actually quite a problem, and it looks ugly as anything. It's not a huge issue, but it really is one that annoys me, personally. Yeah, so most animal pens, you'll have a zone where it'll drop off crops, which I believe is here, or products. A gate where you can either buy animals, but you will have to pay a delivery fee to get the animal delivered. Or if you've bought animals from the animal dealer, in which case you will need a transport of some sort. And you can see what animals they'll carry there. In fact, I'm guessing chickens don't even have their own transport. I wasn't even aware of that, but apparently chickens don't even have their own, so I guess you're buying those through here anyway. So you can buy the animals there. There's also usually a spot for food and a spot for water. Oh, no, I am mistaken. Chickens do not need water. They only need food. But, as I said, with all animals, while they're eating, they'll kick a bit of food out of their pen. The animal screen here will show that as cleanliness, although apparently I have no animals yet, so let's buy a chicken quickly to show it off. Also, additionally, if you want your animals to breed, well, most of them will breed as long as you have more than one. With chickens, you also specifically need at least one rooster. Here they are. Over time, so long as they're fed and all watered, the animals should produce crop and will breed over time to give you more animals for free. Yes, as shown here, it'll show you how quickly they're producing whatever whatever product they make, how much food they have, and how clean their pen is. Again, cleanliness gives a small debuff to productivity. If it gets really bad, I think you lose like 5%, but for the most part, it's not too much of a worry. Just come along with a vehicle with some kind of shovel on it every now and then to clean it up. While chickens and sheep are the easy ones to keep, there are more. Pigs eat... Honestly, I do not remember. I've never kept pigs. I think they eat a bit of a mix of food. Yeah. Corn, wheat, barley, canola, sunflower, soybeans, potatoes, and sugar beets. And I think you get the best results from them if you feed them a mix. I believe it'll tell you on the crop screen once you get them which mix they eat. They make manure and slurry. Yeah, not much. I thought it was just cows that made slurry, but apparently I am wrong on that. Apparently pigs will do that too. You do need to give them straw to get the manure out. But the main actual product you get from pigs is more pigs. I believe they breed faster than the other animals, and you can sell them. You can actually sell your animals on. So pigs can be quite a cheap way of just using up a few of the weirder crops, especially the ones like potatoes that are a bit of a pain to haul around because there's so many of them. But they're not what I've personally done. I don't have a huge amount of experience with the animals and farm sim in general, actually. Second to last animal we have is cows. They're fussy eaters, needing up to 3 types of food, including total mixed ration, which is made from silage. You make that from the grass that I mentioned earlier by fermenting it. You can also make silage using a bunker silo, where you effectively shove it in a pit. I can show you a bunker silo quickly, actually. I believe they're on the silos. If you shove it between one of these sort of concrete barriers, pile up a whole bunch of it, compact it by driving over it with a machine a bunch of times. That's what the wide tyres are best for. And then covering it. And after a certain amount of time, it will ferment into silage. Or again, you can wrap a grass bale, and over time that will just naturally ferment into silage itself. Mixing up the TMR for the cows in one of these trail lines. I think there might have been another machine for that. No? Am I going mad? I'm going mad. Hang on. No, I go mad. But yeah, mixing up TMR creates a sort of improved food for them. If you feed them that and the other types of food they could eat, which I think is maybe straw and grass, you'll get the best results out of cows. While they are fussy, you get manure and digestate, as long as you also, for manure, spread the floor of their stable with straw. This is true for all animals that give you straw. Oh, there is another TMR mixer. It's this machine. I know what it is, because I was thinking of this one, which is a straw shredder. Yeah, so if you use one of these straw shredders, or one of these, which I believe are mounted on the end of an arm on a tractor. Actually, no, that one looks like it's mounted on the back of a tractor. I tell a lie. I think there's an arm-mounted version as well. Yeah, this one. These will shred a straw bale and also spread it onto the cow's pen. Again, that will get you manure, digestate, and you'll also get milk, as well as, obviously, more cows. Milk is, I believe, a reasonably decent priced byproduct. So keeping cows is certainly a way you can go. But you're going to end up with a lot of equipment, probably, if you're going to be trying to get the best out of them. Honestly, I'd recommend them mostly for larger farms. Sorry that I'm leaving slightly longer pauses between my sentences. It's late. I'm short on time to get this recorded. And my voice is dying a little bit, so apologies for the rest of the review. The last animal is horses. I don't have much to say about horses. I'm never bothered with them. I'm pretty certain that they eat oats and water. I think they need straw. I will check now for the sake of some professionalism, at least. Or I would check now, but... Oh, no, they do exist. I was going to say horses don't seem to exist. Hay and oats. Maybe they don't need straw. To get the most out of horses, you have to ride them around. I believe for 5 minutes in real time each in-game day. And their stats will go off. Go off? Go up, even. I believe a fully trained horse is actually worth quite a lot. I think they're supposed to be worth 50,000 each, which is not small, actually. But I just don't care for that. There's no way to automate it. I'm not really a horse person. I am not bothered with horses. So, is that all the ways to make money in this game? Believe it or not, it's not. There's 3 more. First is, ironically enough, working for other people's farm. Go to this menu and you can see contract work. Other people's farms, basically, will hire you to do a specific task. There's also the occasional transport task where you just have to bring an item from one spot to another. These tasks are not usually difficult, although they can be time consuming depending on which field they set. Do check that, because field 9 may not sound too bad, but field 9, if you notice, these are my fields and you see the size of them. Field 9's big. It's very big compared to my own, and I'm only being paid 11,000 for it, so unless you're doing it manually, it might not be worth much. And even if you are doing it manually, that's a lot of time and effort for the 11,000 you're getting out of that. You could probably grow a fairly decent crop in that time. Probably less even, and make more money out of it. But if you're short on money, or if you pick your jobs correctly, they can be a reasonable way to earn a little bit. Additionally, you can either use your own equipment for these jobs, or you can borrow theirs. Borrowing theirs will, as you can see here, slightly reduce how much money you get for doing them. It's not normally an enormous amount, but it is a cut, so consider that. Your own equipment might even be better. Sometimes they'll actually not have particularly great equipment for the job you're doing. If it's something you specialize in, especially, you actually might be able to do it better than they can. You might be able to do it quicker. So sometimes contract work can very much be worth it, because you could just quickly whiz over to the farm and do that field. I should also mention that the machines spawn at the shop. So do consider that you'll also be spending a little bit of time hauling equipment between the farm and the shop, quite possibly, depending on how far away it is. This is especially an issue on some of the larger modded maps. As a quick aside here before I continue, I think I mentioned earlier that there are silos in the game that can fill up some of the things like lime a bit quicker than buying them from the shop. I thought they were only modded, but no, apparently this is a lime station. Apparently they're in the base game as well. So yeah, the more you learn, apparently. Right, to commit a little bit of industrial trespassing, we're going to hot the fence into the biogas plant. This is one of the other ways you can make money, although I believe you have to actually own it first. You can usually buy them as, yeah, their own sort of chunk of land. They're not necessarily cheap, but they are a pretty good money spinner once you own them. How do they work? Well, the biogas plant is power. And to make power, it does it from products like biomaterials. In this case, chaff. Not chaff, silage. Chaff is made into silage. Knew I'd come back to that later on. They usually come with their own bunker silos like these. As I mentioned a few moments ago, they're often large compared to the ones you have on the farm. As before, you make your silage and you bring it over to this thing here. This little loading tray. It'll have a little bar of how much is currently in it. Over time, it'll process that silage down, and I believe at the end of each day you get paid for how much it's processed. As a byproduct, it also makes digestate. It doesn't have to just be manure. You can make it out of grass if you want a little bit less of the smell, if you're using smell-o-vision to play your games for some strange reason. It's not what I've done a huge amount with, but I'm pretty sure you could do a reasonably good farm by harvesting, say, corn with a forage harvester and then offloading it into a BGA. It could be a little something for you to try at some point. Thankfully, for my still dying throat, there is only one more main that I can currently think of method of making money. Lumberjacking. I do not know if that's the word for it, but you can plant and also chop down trees to make a little money. The absolute cheapest way to do this is with a chainsaw, since they only cost 1,000 each. Rang, rang. Nothing to worry about, I'm sure. I bought the land over here so I can chop the trees down, as you do need to own the land they're on to be able to do it. Lumberjacking the manual way with a chainsaw is reasonably simple. You move up to a tree, push the chainsaw to the right angle. Yeah, wait for that little disc to appear to show that it's actually registered to try to cut it, which can be a tiny bit jank. Usually alright, but it's a little iffy sometimes. Go. That shows you what angle you cut the tree at. Hold the left mouse button. And it'll cut the tree. Probably goes off I'm standing, but don't worry, you can't die. Initially, you can hold the left mouse button, go over smaller branches and lock them off. Make it a lot easier to see. This is something I didn't know for a very long time, and it was something I would have benefited from knowing when I was doing some lumberjack style work. You can use this to clear trees off your fields, and you can also usually sell them at sawmills. Now, trees are too big to carry on their own, but if you slice them up, which is a slower process the larger the tree is, most of the trees you'll be harvesting will not be this sort of slightly warped sort, especially if you're growing them themselves. They're these sort of neat uniform trees. Right, it's still too heavy, but the point is, once you slice tree bits small enough, they're small enough you can lift them by hand, or you can get some equipment specifically for it. Quickly show that off. The main forestry equipment is in here. Oh, animals, quickly, should mention. There's a little TMR mixing wagon. I thought there was another one. This machine will just scoop it straight up from the front. This is actually not a bad way to do it, especially for silage that normally needs to be picked up. Especially if you like storing those crops raw. But anyway, go back to forestry. There's a handful of machines for forestry, and they mostly go between log haulers and cutters. Log haulers, like this man TGX. Exactly what they sound like. It's a truck with a flatbed. They're usually fairly slow. I think this is actually the fastest by a long shot. And it has its own little crane on it to pick up logs and help load them. It's a bit of a fiddly process, but you get used to it, and it can actually be quite enjoyable once you get into the flow of it. Logs themselves are worth a decent amount of money, but they're worth more if you cut them in larger, longer, straighter pieces. Makes them a bit more awkward to haul and deal with, but again, worth more. Machines like these can cut down the trees, and they do so very quickly. They also strip the branches. Smaller stuff like this little Sampo can only harvest some trees. I don't think I've ever used this one, actually, but it is very cute looking. For the most part, though they're expensive, I recommend you get something bigger like the Scorpion King here. These machines, as said, will cut down huge swaths of wood very quickly, and they're definitely different to use compared to the rest of the farming equipment we have. The tab button, I should mention, is what I've been using to swap between trees in this review. Trees? Good vehicles in this review. The controls on the The tree cutters might feel a bit weird at first, but trust me, you do get used to them. To operate one of these, what you have to do is find a willing victim. I'm going to try and cut down that tree there. Turn on the harvester, open it up. Pray that this tree is one of the ones that can operate. Some of the trees on the map, yeah, like that one, I was afraid of that. You can't harvest. I thought originally it was just they had to be fairly straight, but I think maybe the trees that are on the map by default a lot of the time that aren't on logging specific maps can't be harvested with these. Oh, I really hope I can actually show one of these off. I don't want to have done all this and not to be able to. Let's try this one, maybe, or maybe that one. Actually, that one looks like the sort you can do. It's the only slightly awkward thing with Lumberjacking is that you do occasionally get things like this. Position your cutter in place. And prepare to watch Mother Nature crack. Set how big a pieces you want to cut into, which is usually dependent on your trailer. And press the X key to neatly lop it up into bits. See how quick that was? That was a whole great big, like, I don't know, 20-foot tree. Now I can throw it. So yes, and then use one of those little cranes, pick them up, load them up, bring them to a sawmill, and sell them for a bunch of money. Yeah. I put in my notes for the script here that there's a few more miscellaneous vehicles to talk about. As mentioned, my voice is kind of dying, but I will go over these quickly. There's not too much I haven't covered. Auger Wagons are basically a slight variant on trailers. However, there's a few small changes. A handful, like the Seed Runner, have dual compartments to store two different types of crops in one. And in the case of the Seed Runner, what I generally recommend with this is that you fill one half of it with seeds and the other with fertilizer, and then use that to ferry fertilizer and seeds between your vehicles on the field and the shop. Additionally, the larger ones have actually quite a significant carry capacity, although do need a lot of horsepower. Are generally massive. These are very big machines, actually. And, critically, have an auger built into them, this sort of screw thread thing here. What that will do, once it's unfolded, is act like the extending arms on a combine harvester. It's a way for them to offload from themselves, but they can load into something high up, rather than just tipping out the back or sides like the trailers can. Let's see, what have I not talked about? Oh, crop protection. While I've shown you the crop sprayers, there are these two machines. Interestingly enough, that one can carry solid fertilizer. I did not know that. Which are purpose-built to spray fertilizer. And their working widths are huge. Those massive great arms unfold all the way out. While they can't do anything else, yeah, 50 meters almost working width. They'll cover an enormous amount of field in one go. These are what you'll probably be using once you've got a really big farm up and going. Wheel loaders, telehandlers, I've mentioned all of these. Again, skid steer loaders are these little turn on the spot little bit like a souped up forklift. Let us see. Oh, Forestry. I forgot to mention with Forestry, there's a few extra little bits and pieces. The PL75 is a tree planter. It runs out of trees painfully fast. It can only hold one pallet at a time, and I think they only hold like a handful of, yeah, only 20 trees. They run out really fast. I would recommend buying a whole bunch of them and putting them on a trailer to refill on the go. Oh, you can buy some of the hay and straw and silage bales, which can be a slightly more expensive but simpler way to get food for your animals. It needs a lot less equipment. Additionally, in forestry, there's this thing, which you basically drive up, which is using a PTO, so it's meant for a tractor. You drive it up to a tree, shift it in place, you can manipulate it a little bit and cut the tree down, but it'll only cut at the height it's at. The Flegel long neck is a sort of claw that you fit onto the back of a tractor to shift trees around. The ST65T is actually one I recommend you do use if you're doing a lot of wood cutting. It's a stump grinder. What this will do is once on and moved over the top of a tree stump, it'll grind it away to nothing. This basically means that the land's a lot clearer. Your machinery won't get stuck on it, especially if you're clearing out new farmland. Additionally, these two machines are portable wood chippers. they will... I believe this one just piles it straight off the back. Or maybe into a trailer, I forget. Well, this one has a pipe like a forage harvester would. And I believe it has its own little claw for self-loading. Additionally, there's also a little trailed log loader. And one thing that is literally just a log carriage. Anything else I've forgotten about? Levelers are designed for silage heaps. They basically push things around and flatten them out a little bit. And include these sort of just flat walls, basically designed for leveling. And also specifically the stego, which is designed to be put on your vehicle and pulled around behind it over the heaps to level them faster. Header trailers. If you're wondering what these are for, because they certainly look a bit unusual, these are for the combine harvesters. So the combine harvesters like header. Some of these get quite big. I mean, you look at the size of these things, 12 meters wide. They're way too wide for most roads. You actually struggle to get through a lot of them. Now, some headers, like this Draper Stream, can convert themselves into their own trailer. But some of them can't do that. So header trailers are that, basically. They're trailers you can load them onto, have them lengthwise. Usually the harvester in question can pull these behind it so they can bring their own around. I think this is for like the big sugar beet machines, I think. It was a roper. So yeah, that could be a little thing. Belts. Belts are kind of their own thing. I won't get into these now. But the idea is they could pick things up off the ground that are in front of them. This one specifically will do that. Things placed in front of here, it will load up onto them. This is usually used with potatoes. This thing can be used to turn corners with those... no, not turn corners. This thing is used to lift up and extend outwards if you need to lift into, say, load into a trailer. The TC80 goes around corners because it joins in the middle. And the RH2460... words. Sorry again. Voice is dying a bit. Brain is dying. It's late. What you do is you load sugar beets or potatoes into this hopper. It'll run them at the back and it will create pallets with them. Or I think you can have it connect onto belts as well. But yes, what it will do is it will automatically create pallets of beets or potatoes, which might be easier to move than loading them up into a trailer, depending on what you're doing in particular. And I believe there is just one... No, there's a couple of last things to do. I'm genuinely not sure... Oh, okay. No, I always used to wonder what this is for. No, I get it now. This is for converting a trailer hitch, like you might get on a pickup truck, into a 3-point, but only really for moving things around. So you can use that to shift some of your implements with your truck. The FST is a portable fuel tank. You fill this up at one of the regular petrol stations and your other vehicles can fill up off of it. And the meadow roller, very last thing. This is the anti-field, basically. If you have a field and you don't want to anymore, you unfold one of these over it, you roll across it, and it will turn it back into regular ground. Or you can use it, for example, for neatening up the edges of slightly lumpy fields. It's also mentioned, most of the buildings in the game are placeable. Some don't technically do anything, like decoration buildings. Some like pastures hold animals. There's a doghouse. I think that comes with a dog. I've never bothered myself. I'm a cat person. The Karcher is a pressure washer. Your machines will get dirty over time, and this will wash them off. The vehicle workshop is your own garage. Allows you to customize vehicles. You do still have to pay for the modifications, but only the first time you get them. Once you've got them, you effectively store them on that vehicle, and you can swap them for free. Water station fills up your water tanks. The HE700 is your own log drop-off point. You feed logs into it and you get a bit of money for them. Silos, exactly what they sound like. They store more crops. These two have a loading bay. This one does not, but it will still increase capacity. Hayloft stores straw and hay. Bunker silos store grass and turn it into silage. Or chaff, rather, and turn it into silage. Decorations are decorations. These do nothing, but they look nice. They do, however, have a maintenance cost, which I feel is a mistake on the part of the developers. I don't know that I'd have done that, but fair enough. Sheds. It's a roof to put over your vehicles. Doesn't do anything, but looks neat. And you can buy farmhouses. You don't have to stick with one you've got. Or you don't have to have one at all if you don't want, but you won't be able to skip the night. You can technically landscape the ground to terraform it, but again, I'm not going to get into that now. You'll be able to work that one out. It's not great, but it is an option. So maybe the game sounds good so far. Are there any particular bad aspects that I haven't brought up? There are a few. The initial load time can be a bit long. It's not awful, but if you have a lot of mods, it can take a while for your game to load up. Though once it's running, there aren't any load screens. It's basically good to go once you're in game. The physics are mostly good, but when they do jank, you'll notice it. It's all too easy to get a tree stuck, for example, between, say... Hang on, let's go back to the machine I'm in. Say I am hauling a trailer. It is surprisingly easy, and you might call this bad driving, but, you know, to get a tree stuck in that joint between the trailer and the tractor and not be able to pull out of it. You can reset vehicles to the shop, but then you've got to go and get them. And if you have any crops in a trailer that you reset, you lose them. Additionally, the AI can get in your way as well, especially with this. The AI, especially with traffic, if it's driving traffic and you get in the way, it will approach until it's close to you, stop and honk at you. Which is not too bad, but you could sometimes get jammed between multiple bits of traffic on a road that you can't back off of, and it's a pain. And what you have to do there is either turn traffic off or move to a different vehicle and wait for a bit until the traffic despawns. The AI is not too bright either. I have mentioned that earlier with the helpers. They're not dreadful by any means, but they will occasionally do something you just wish they wouldn't. Additionally, vehicles can feel a bit weird sometimes. Especially at high speed. They don't handle that well, and they can be a bit prone to tipping over, and by default there's technically no way to roll your vehicle back over, but a lot of the tractors have big enough wheels that you can sort of drive while turning to one side and they will self-right. Additionally, there's very little focus on the hands-on half of farming. I don't personally care, I'm here for the machines, but I know some people might like that. It's not at all like Stardew Valley, for example. You're still growing crops at the end of the day, but you are doing it in a very different way. It'll also be a bit slow, obviously, and occasionally difficult. Crops are, again, not worth an enormous amount, especially on the harder harder economy settings. Lastly, well, no, not quite lastly, but it is a game about farming. If you're not into that, you might not care for it. Although I was surprised. I actually did find I very much got into it, despite not expecting to be into it at all. The last actual downside is that 2022's edition looks to be an alright improvement, and that's coming out quite soon. So, while it is a good game, it might very soon be replaced with a superior, if less mod-supported version. What about the good? Well, it is a very relaxing game. There's very few games as sort of chilled out and laid back as this one. If I'm having a stressful day or things have not been going well in other games, I can just turn this on and fairly comfortably, you know, assume that things are going to go at least alright. And that can be quite nice sometimes, especially with like the year everyone's been having, really. Recently, or the several years everyone's been having, you know. That's by no means a bad thing. Additionally, if you got it while it was on Unreal and free, it didn't cost you anything. It didn't cost me anything. And it might come up on Unreal again someday. I have seen some of the games on there come up more than once, so if you keep an eye on that, you might not even have to pay for this game. Additionally, it's quite a nice looking game. It's not super high def, but the machine's models are really good. Like, if you actually take a moment to zoom in on them, there's a lot of parts. Like, look at that, the fan works. You could barely see that. You can't see that from the front, but they animated it anyway. Like, there's a load of tiny little details on things that they animate, like that the little switch on the back of the TX, like little lever. Like, they really care graphically, and the modders also care. Some of the mods are really good. Some of them are easily the same quality as the machines the devs put in, and there's a lot of them. Like, I was amazed how much mod support there was, and it's all built in from a built-in mod browser. You don't have to leave the game to install them. It has to restart when you install new ones, but that's it. And also, while it is simplified a bit for for the sake of simplicity, it is quite a nice little representation of farming. I feel I have learned a bit about it in real life. I see farming machines on the road and I recognise brands and things. They're based off real brands. They work with the real farmers. I think there's like John Deere, Case, New Holland. I think there's Class. No, Class might have a bit of DLC in this one. Yeah, there's a bit of official DLC as well. It's fairly good. If you buy the season pass, you get it all for about 25 quid, which is cheaper than buying it on its own. That's quite a bit cheaper than buying it on its own, or you can buy it individually for not too much. So yes, while it's not a game that's going to be for everyone, overall Farm Sim, I would say, is exactly what it sounds like. A farm simulator game. If that's what you want, you're not going to be disappointed. Or at least I would be very surprised if you were disappointed. It may not be a game for everyone, because again, it can be repetitive, it can be always feel a little workish, and that's kind of what farming's like. But if it sounds like something you might like, I really actually do recommend you try it, because you might be surprised, like I was. And that'll about do it for the video. Yeah, my voice is completely shot at this point, so I'll wrap this up quickly. YouTube's not kind to channels that don't get engagement, so I really do appreciate if you want to like, subscribe or comment. It really helps. There's not too much more to say with that. If you feel like being really kind, you could even share it out to people that you know if you enjoyed it. And I should mention that this game costs about 20 quid, 15 quid. If you want one that's a bit less than that, I have my own game actually. There's the official trailer is actually on this channel, and I'll link it in the description. It's a game about being kind of the emergency services equivalent for space debris. Maybe you'll like that too. It's a little different to this, but maybe you'll like that too, or instead, or I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what next week's review is going to be, honestly, but I'll see you next time.